for the one person that might not know who you are, who is Max?
In terms of where I've gotten in life, I started off thinking I was going to be a scientist. I did a chemistry degree. This was partly because back when was I 18? 1999. Back then, being a programmer wasn't very high status. Um, Honestly, I'd always been channeled by my family into the idea of doing more prestigious things, and so being a programmer was considered geeky. Like if you ever watched Jurassic Park, for example, the programmer is portrayed as being gross and socially inept, and nobody likes him. And that was like the basic attitude towards development and software at the time. So yeah, like it's a little difficult to look back on at this point. But that was very much the case, and so went off, did a chemistry degree, got into the chemistry industry, discovered that actually I really didn't like it. And the main reasons I think, with hindsight, that I didn't enjoy it is because I realized how slow it is. Science is slow, and it takes years to get results. And I realized that it's going to take me an awful long time to get to the point where I could even work on anything interesting. So it was depressing. I went home and I installed Linux on my computer and I discovered open source. I discovered various communities building things that I thought were really interesting and exciting. Like I got into the key desktop environment community, discovered some apps to work on, discovered how fun it was to work on people, especially if they're from all over the world, from cultures you're not familiar with, just meeting them and learning about them, and really enjoying the code together and building stuff. So I kept doing that until I managed to catch the attention of a London startup, Last.fm. That's where I worked. They hired me even though I didn't have the right degree and all that because they'd seen my work. I think that kind of story doesn't happen as often anymore, which is unfortunate. I don't know if you know
Yeah,
anyone.
it's kind of
I don't personally know anyone who echoes that story. Now, I would totally hire people that I'd noticed, but I guess the thing is, do you notice them? Anyway, it's an aside. So it was while I was there that I created Homebrew, the package manager for Mac that, is probably 50 to 60 million people using it nowadays. It's quite insane how big it's gone. We were working on apps, and there was 6 platforms of apps. We had all the phone apps and all the desktop apps, and the unifying platform was Mac for that development. And coincidentally, Mac was just becoming popular for developers, probably because it was Unix, but without the terrible user interfaces that come with Linux. I'd switched maybe 6 months before we started using it full time to Mac. And the truth is, like, the package manager at the time just didn't really satisfy me. I was used to the really awesome ones on Linux. I used to use Arch Linux, and their package manager Pacman was just the best. I think it probably still is the best. So I modeled what I built with Homebrew on, all the package managers I knew, and tried to take all the cool features from each and then add a bunch of stuff on top, which was mine. And I designed it really nicely, and a bunch of other things came together to the point where it took off like extremely fast, very, very quickly became very popular. And it just sort of kept going like that, basically. Phenomenally popular piece of software that, is definitely a huge part of whatever legacy I'm leaving this world. And that's me.
yeah. So you said you got started with open source very like a long time ago, and for the kind of younger programmers, like that was before there was anything there was GitHub or anything like that, right?
Yeah, aging myself a little here, but I probably got into open source in 2003, I think is, or maybe even 2002. No GitHub. What we had was SourceForge, which still exists, and it's just as bad as it ever was. And it was always awful, but we didn't have much choice. And then we didn't have Git, we had Subversion, and before that, CVS, the concurrent versioning system.
Good
Which
times.
CVS was pretty terrible. Every file in the repository was independently versioned. So with Git, there's a SHA that references the commit, and the commit contains multiple files. But with CVS, every file had to be versioned independently, which led to situations where you could easily have a different checkout to someone else that you were working with. There was frequently problems just dealing with that. And it was a centralized solution, so everyone had to commit one at a time. So if the repository was big enough, you could be in a queue. Subversion improved on it somewhat, but not that great. And then Linus, the Linux kernel guy, got fed up with the
Yeah,
state.
that guy.
Yeah, and that's when he made Git. And the guy is clearly talented because he just keeps making like incredibly big projects. But obviously, he is someone who doesn't really care about other people's experience, which is why Git is such a source of pain for so many nowadays. It's an interesting case of a tool that became popular in spite of the fact that it has a terrible user interface, because it was just so much more powerful than the alternatives in ways that counted. I often think about how it became popular despite the fact that if you give it to someone who's relatively new to programming or version control, they struggled for years. It took me years to learn how to use it as well.
Yeah. I'm around people right now that is just starting to learn how to use Git and version control, and it is very interesting as someone that's been using Git for over 10 years and just like are so comfortable with it now, seeing how much people actually struggle with it. And I totally forgot how much of a struggle it is and how long it took me to learn Git.
Yeah, I find it hard to put my mind back to before I understood it, but I do remember like how frustratingly difficult it was, especially because it came out around the same time as Stack Overflow came out. Dating myself again here. Stack Overflow, I think, was 2008, and so it was, before Stack Overflow, I'm not sure anyone like who never experienced programming before it can truly appreciate how difficult it was to find solutions to problems. You would find forums that someone had posted the same question as you, and then they'd post immediately afterwards, "Oh, I figured it out," and they wouldn't say what their solution was, and there was just the
Yeah.
internet these things. And you're like, "What was the solution?" you,
Yeah, I've had that happen a few times. That like the meme is now that if you don't find the answer in Stack Overflow, then it's on some obscure forum, and exactly what you said with someone's gonna say, "Oh, I fixed it," but they're not gonna tell you the solution.
Yeah, it was a lot of that. Like, I think we were better at reading manuals at that time because of that. It's a skill that has left me since, because, even though the phrase is RTFM, read the what's the nicer way of saying it? Fabulous
Read the
manual.
freaking manual.
Like, they're difficult. It's difficult reading. Although, the few times in my life that I have sat down and read the thing because I needed to, it is surprising how much more you can learn about something that you thought you basically understood. But yeah.
I mean, yeah, you've had that with like hardware devices now. If people are coming out with these videos of like features that I don't know, a microwave had, and like, but if you read the manual, you would have discovered that features 2 decades ago.
Yeah, I wonder how much further ahead we'd all be if we just read the manual.
Yeah,
Give
but
that.
yeah, speaking of you say things that you are going to leave behind, probably what most people uh know you for is Homebrew and it's like people that don't even use a Mac, which I found very incredible. Is like they still know what Homebrew is,
Mm.
and then in tech circles, a lot of people know who you are because you kind of come up associated with Homebrew. So what was all that about? You talked a little about how you like why you wanted to make it and so on, but like what do you think made it into such a success and like pretty much all of what you're known like the main thing you're known for now is Homebrew? We had a conversation last time we talked about you that was kind of a little annoying, maybe.
Well, I have mixed feelings about being tech famous, I have to say. But you know, that's a whole other conversation. Um, Certainly, yeah, Homebrew is just enormous at this point, as you say. Like, it's not just programmers anymore. Like, it never was really. I remember a couple of years after I'd started it. Right, I'm gonna date myself again here, right? Homebrew's 15 years old. 15 this year. Ooh, it's
Yeah.
been around a long time. That's part of the reason it's so big, right? I've realized over my career is that you do need 5 years at least in order to start getting really well known. Um, Now, Homebrew twisted my perception of that truth for a long time because it became so popular so quickly. But the developer community was smaller back in 2009. iPhone had only been out, 2 years? The App Store on iPhone had only been out a year. And for me, that was a pivotal moment in development. Um, it went from being considered something which was, like the guy in Jurassic Park to being considered something that was cool. Everyone started coming up to me at parties and saying, "Oh, I've got an app idea. You're a developer. Can you build it for me?" And
Oh, so that's what when it started.
in my opinion, I'm sure everyone who's been around for long enough has a different perspective on the turning point, but there was distinctly a turning point. It was coupled with the rise of Web 2, which started probably in 2005, 2006, when people started building like real web applications that could do things because JavaScript was so much more capable. And, interactivity started coming to the internet. Like, you know, we never called it Web 1 at the time, but Web 1 was kind of very basic,
Yeah,
relatively.
it's a very static part of the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So Homebrew's success was like timing to a certain extent for sure. As I say, the Mac had started to become the developer's choice around the time I released Brew, and I picked Ruby for the language because I didn't know it and it seemed really nice. And I learned to really love Ruby. I still really love Ruby. I think it's a beautiful language. But Ruby on Rails was a big thing at the time. So the Ruby community were like, "Oh, and it's built with Ruby." And GitHub was relatively new, and I really took advantage of GitHub. Um, I think they pushed Brew as an example of how to use GitHub effectively in a social context. The part that I really took advantage of was the virality of the social components of GitHub, making it really, really simple for people to create the formula, as I mistakenly called them, the package descriptions, because at least for the first couple of years, Homebrew was just a Git repository. You cloned it, and that's where the software was built to. So you could just edit it with your editor to add new formula, and then just push straight back to GitHub. This is before pull requests, so I had to actually monitor the fork graph for the first couple of years in order to get new formula into it.
No
And
way.
yeah, it was a different. Like they had GitHub used to have messaging. You could message people, and the reason for that was because you would message people to tell them to check out your fork, so that they could merge from their fork into the main repository. There was no other way to really collaborate in that respect. Like when pull requests first came out, it was clear that GitHub were innovating in the space. And this is why GitHub got so big. They were once very innovative when it came to software collaboration. As I say, SourceForge used to be, still is awful, and they never even like explored those sort of parts, right? At all.
Y-
GitHub really nailed it.
Yeah, it's really interesting the things we have now that we kind of take for granted now that we didn't have back in the day.
Yeah, I got so I'm sure a controversial opinion, but I don't really feel like GitHub are innovating particularly anymore. At least in the web software, right? Obviously, GitHub Copilot was fairly innovative when it came out, whenever it was, 18 months, 22 years ago, whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, you can also make the case that they didn't really create it. OpenAI did.
Indeed. Just using the tech.
Yeah. So the main reason we actually started talking was you reached out to me to. You want to explain how we got to meet and then segue into why we're talking today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, after Homebrew, I stayed at last firm maybe 6 months, and then I quit to work on Homebrew full time, because it was, incredibly rewarding to work on Homebrew, to have made something that so many people were interested in and wanted to contribute to and wanted to use. And it's difficult to find that kind of satisfaction in a normal job. You get it somewhat if you're an entrepreneur, but it was great. So then I had maybe 6 months money saved up, worked on Homebrew full time, and then I had to go and get another job. And this kept happening. Like, it's the cycle of my career. Basically, I've always loved working on open source best, and I've always been looking for ways to work on open source full time rather than part time. I used to say I had 2 full-time jobs because it felt like it. I had my day job that paid the rent, and then I had my evenings, weekends, and late nights with insufficient sleep job, which was Homebrew mostly, and the other open source I've worked on over the years.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, especially when they are trying to make their open source project their main source of income.
Yes. Indeed, like it's not a problem that's very unique, frankly. There's 2.2 million open source developers, and I feel that I could just meet any one of them and they feel pretty similarly. I met loads over the last few months, which is why I reached out to you, Jessica, because I'll get to it. So yeah, I spent some time in previous years trying to get it to the point where I could work on open source full time. I started a Patreon in 2017, I think, and I spent months trying to get the amount of donations coming in up so that it could, even pay half my rent, and just gave up after 4 or 5. I realized that I was spending 30-40% of my time marketing myself rather than actually doing the open source. And I didn't like selling myself like that, I didn't feel good about it. It felt too much like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. And so, yeah, I gave up and I looked into the other solutions over the years. It was 2.5 years ago that I was once again in between jobs and wanting to work on open source full time, when I looked into what was newly available and didn't see anything that I felt could work. So I just realized that maybe the person who was going to have to try and fix the problem was me. So I took a deep dive into technology I hadn't really looked at before, which in this case is blockchain, cryptocurrency technologies, and smart contracts. And it was one evening I had a moment of inspiration where I realized that there was the potential to put all the package manager data on chain and use the connections between the projects as a kind of flow diagram for token transfers using smart contracts, thus distributing token not only to like favorites, as I call them, the projects that do okay for donations, although I've been talking to some of these projects over the last few months and the amount they're getting is still kind of minuscule, honestly. But all the way through the graph, all the way through the open source graph. Like, as we know, open source is this massive tower of bricks that has been assembled over the last 25, 30 years, piece by piece, and stuff near the bottom frequently is unknown, thanklessly maintained by some guy from Nebraska since 2003. So I took the idea to some people I knew, and we managed to raise a bunch of money, and we've been building it for the last 2 years. This system, which is in effect a kind of way for open source developers to just receive token rewards based on the impact of their open source. There's no other criteria for open source developers. We've measured the impact of all the open source packages in 7 major package managers, with more to come. The impact is measured using the dependency graph. It makes a very ungameable kind of ranking system using that. If people often think we'd use installs or GitHub stars, but it's too easy to game that. And when you're talking about tangible rewards, people game it. Certainly discovered that over the last couple of weeks. And so if you have an impactful open source project, you can sign up. We launched our testnet almost 2 weeks ago today. You can sign up today and start earning test rewards immediately. There's no other conditions for you. Like, it was very important to me when designing this that we didn't change the nature of open source, right? Because open source is, as you know, like, beautiful. It's an incredible thing. And
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
it would be devastating to me if I spoiled any part of it. So we've been meticulous in how we built this system so that it really is kind of a no-brainer for open source projects. So yeah, I was reaching out to other projects over the last few months to get them onboarded during the ITN. And it was a pleasure to connect with you, Jessica, and talk about your projects and get them onboarded.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So you reached out to me, I think it was three and a half weeks ago, about beta testing this new project, which you, for one or another reason, called Tea. So I guess it's very in line with your naming scheme. If I look back at Homebrew and formulas and pouring brews and stuff like that.
Yeah, the name was a suggestion from a friend. I was actually looking at much more stupid names, I have to say, but I wouldn't have picked any of them. But, well, if we go back to Homebrew, the name of that was a suggestion from a friend. I was looking for a naming theme, because I really liked projects with naming themes, because I found that it really helped.
Also kind of builds a brand.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was a nice extra consequence. But I like the themes because it meant that you had an analogy in your head already for how something might work. And as long as the person naming the things in the system did it correctly, then you could make connections. I also found like package managers to be full of bad names. Like the word package gets used in so many different contexts, and I was trying to avoid things like that. So my friend suggested beer as a theme because we were in the pub at the time, and I thought it was great. And I came up with Homebrew that evening, and then all the other names in Homebrew came out of that theme. So yeah, tea was a suggestion from a friend, but I really liked it as soon as I heard it because it's like, hey, we've all grown up a bit. Let's stop talking about beer and the things you do with beer, and now we just sit down and we drink tea. And I thought, yeah, that's great, and there's a slight connection to the Homebrew. So, and so it's called Tea Protocol, and we've been out 2 weeks, and well, it's going very well so far. I have to say, we've just crossed 360,000 people signed up in 2 weeks.
That's incredible.
It was surprising. We thought we'd do good because we had a lot of inbound interest over the last year, but our numbers are very good and continuing to rise. We've had scaling problems several times over the last 2 weeks, just out, not expecting it. And with when you're working with blockchain tech, scaling is hard, but we managed to surmount them. And we're nearing almost 2,000 projects signed up, open source projects. So yeah, the majority of our users are not open source developers, and this was, deliberate from the start. We're building a new kind of economy for open source to reward open source. And we need people who are not typically aware of open source to believe in the value of open source and to participate in this ecosystem. So we have, um, 340,000 people who believe in the project and want to put their money where their mouth is when it goes live. And part of that is because we've been like messaging this change of perception on open source, changing the way people view it from it being a charity that as a developer of an open source project, the most you can hope for is a cup of coffee, perhaps, from the people using your software, to this being some value ecosystem where everyone who participates can benefit. Open source is in everything nowadays. It's on Mars, it's at the bottom of the ocean, it's in every computer, it's in every phone, every piece of software, pretty much. Very few.
Yeah, I would even go so far to say that like even closed source, like big tech companies these days, are mostly also built on open source.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like if you think about it, even if you come across 100% closed source piece of software, which if I did, I would not trust at all, personally, it almost certainly was built using an open source compiler and an open source build chain and published using open source tooling. It's
Yeah,
just,
and their infrastructure is more than likely running on open source like infrastructure, like either just Linux servers or Kubernetes.
yeah, well, exactly. Like, who runs a web server on Windows or some other proprietary Unix nowadays? Like, there must be some people out there, I'm sure, but it seems like a world of pain to pick like the complete non-typical option.
So a thing that we haven't really dived into yet, which I personally like was the main driver for also why I wanted to like have everyone hear your story, was because T is also putting their money, so to speak, where their mouth is, in the sense that T is also open source.
Yeah, well, indeed. Like, we're a product for the open source community, and we want it to be governed and run by the open source community. So there's no way that we couldn't do as much as we can as open source from the get-go. The protocol's being launched by a non-profit Swiss association. So there is no need for the protocol to make money in a traditional sense. But the thing that I've learned about these token projects over the last couple of years is that you can't just release a token without a way for the cycle of economics within that project to function. So what we built is a system that rewards open source developers, and what we need is a way to generate utility for that token for the other participants. Otherwise, over time, the token price will just fall to zero and it won't be rewarding anyone anymore. You see this a lot in crypto projects. It's why there's so much crypto skepticism out there. It's very easy to launch a token. It's very, very difficult to make it function over a longer period of time. And obviously, there's an awful lot of scams out there, quite honestly. I understand all the skepticism surrounding it, but I think people will see once we go live when there's some genuine success stories. Like I'm hoping like you will have a genuine success story, Jessica, when it goes live on the mainnet about how the T token has made it so that you can work on open source either a lot more than you could before or entirely. But that's an aside. Like the tokenomics is what I was talking about. But I'm sure we have a lot of listeners who aren't that familiar with all of it. Essentially, it's just you can't have economics without buying and selling happening in relatively equal measure, and you need to provide demand drivers essentially. So it was a complicated design the last 2 years, coming up with something where we could reward open source without changing the nature of open source, just fixing that one particular problem. And also deployed a tokenomics model which will function for the long term. But we have 50 years of emissions calculated into this thing, which means that even if we don't manage to re-inject token back to the association that's launching the protocol, it still will run for 50 years without anyone touching it autonomously on the blockchain, governed by the open source community.
Wow, that's really incredible that it's been thought so far ahead.
Yeah, I was surprised how much we had to do. I can't be, as someone who was relatively new to crypto, I was like, we're planning for 50 years? Like, I never worked at a company that thought more than 2 or 3 years ahead, you know? But yeah, that is necessary.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you all the time, if you're not really in this crypto space, you hear a lot that these like crypto bros, as they're called, just just in it to make a big buck or a quick buck. So it's really interesting seeing that projects like this actually plan that far ahead.
There is well, as I was at ETH Denver last week, and I met a lot of people who are similar in mindset, right? They see this technology as being something that can be used for good, and that's what they're trying to do. But yeah, there's a shit ton of scams in this sector, I gotta say. So I don't object when people are skeptical, but I do ask that everyone who hears this goes and checks us out and just sees what they think for themselves, right? And like I say, I think once we go live, the success stories are what is going to turn perception. Because yeah, every time we're on Hacker News, I can't even read those threads.
Oh no, that sounds really bad.
Yeah, there's enough people who just really hate everything associated with blockchain, crypto, and smart contract type things. So
yeah, I can only imagine. So for the people behind Tea, so you said you've been working on this for the last couple of years and you've been raising venture funding. So I'm curious, as an open source project, which Tea is going to Tea is, and everything about it is open source, how have you managed to convince traditional venture capitalism to invest in it when it's all going to be open source and non-profit anyway?
yeah, well, so the VCs that invested in us are obviously getting a piece of various pies so that they can get a return on their investment. The tokenomics is calculated so that more than 50% of all the token that exists is going to open source and the community at launch. The rest of it is split across various buckets, including marketing, getting the token onto exchanges, core contributors, advisors, and the investors of Tea Incorporated.
Which is Tea Incorporated, which is the owner of the nonprofit in Switzerland, right? If I remember.
No, so the Swiss company is launching the protocol, and the dev shop, the incorporated dev shop, is being paid by the Swiss Association to build it and maintain it.
I see. So how you managed to? I'm assuming that you had people on the team that's been paid from 2 years ago, I guess. I was like, how did all of this get started from an idea to having a team behind you, as well as yourself, obviously, that's been making this protocol and also making all of it around it?
Yeah, well, we are VC funded, so we raised 17 million, no more than a year and a half ago was the last round. So yeah, I had the idea one evening. I woke up my wife, who said, "That's a really good idea. Now let me sleep." And I phoned up a friend that I knew who had connections to crypto VCs to tell him about the idea and see if he wanted to start the company with me. And then it was pretty quick. Everyone understands, especially in the blockchain space, about the importance of open source, because everything that they have made money from in blockchain areas is built on open source or is open source. You know, like a lot of them made huge amounts of money on various layers on top of Ethereum. Ethereum's open source. All the layers on top of it are open source. Basically, nobody in this sector trusts it unless it's open source. So they understood the value and the importance of it. So most of the people we spoke to straight away were like, yeah, we were hooked. All you had to say was, I created Homebrew and I want to fix open source funding.
Yeah, that's also, I feel like, could be a relatively big attributor to like the early success is that you were involved in it.
Sorry, say that again.
I said that could maybe also be a big attributor to or contributor to the early success, that you were involved in it and you can go and say, hi, I made Homebrew, this thing.
Yeah, well, we have shamelessly stuck made by the creator of Homebrew all over it because, you know, it works is the truth of it. Yeah, nowadays I feel a little bad. I get all the credit for Homebrew, but I haven't worked on it in years. I passed it on to the community. You know, I was very careful with curating that community, like encouraging people and guiding how the community formed and the shape of the product we were building. So when it was my time to leave, I burned out, honestly. So many years of doing so much on it. And I felt that I'd done everything I needed to it. It was the product I wanted to build, and built it. And so I passed it to the community, and nobody noticed enough to stop even giving me all the credit. So,
I
you
mean,
know,
that's pretty good, right?
that's how.
If you mentored your other contributors well in a project you started, and then you can leave without it imploding, that's pretty good, right?
Oh yeah, this is how open source should work, and I'm really glad that that happened, and that as a result, Homebrewers continue to grow and be an overall great piece of software. Like, I have a few issues with it since I left, but mostly it's still great.
Great. So after you launched the testnet, there was a lot of traffic, as you said. But what about up to, like, kind of this whole process still from going from an idea to actually launching the testnet now? Like, how quickly did you scale out in terms of like a team that helped make this into reality? Was that like as soon as you secured funding, or did that come on a like need basis or something else?
Yeah, it was gradual at first, which I think was the correct choice. It's really important that those first few people that you're working with are, the right people, and that you build out the foundations of whatever you're trying to build before you then scale it. So we scaled a lot in the last year. I think we went from maybe 6 or 7 people to now we're 33. Once you got those foundations down, it becomes easy to add more and more people, and everyone's clear about what everyone is doing at the roles they have. So adding more people into the slots is easier. So yeah, I think the vast majority of the work has been done in the last 9 months.
Yeah, and for people that are in the early stages of like what you have gone through, how do people find good people to both build up that foundation with? Is it friends? Is it connections? And how do people then like find good people to scale up with? What's been your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, by far the best way to hire is people you've previously worked with. It's really the case. Like, you can work well together, you know what their talents and skill sets are, and you know where they'll fit in whatever you're doing now. It's really, really hard to beat. Other than that, the second best is definitely people you know and trust who have connections themselves. So we've hired a lot through that route. And after that, yeah, get a good recruiter, a really good recruiter, and convince them that you are the company that is making the next best thing that is in this space, and thus they need to give all their best candidates to you. You can't beat quality staff. You really can't. People who are good at what they do and are honest about what they can't do. Like, God, it's really difficult to work with people who are insecure about their skills in the way that they lie about what they can do, and they pretend that they did something well, or they get defensive when they haven't done it well enough. Like, this isn't the same as imposter syndrome, right? We all have that. I was talking to you about this last call we had. Like, people imagine that I don't have imposter syndrome because I made homebrew after all, but like, I frequently do. Like, we all do. We're not good at everything, and we're only guessing if we're able to do something in advance of it or not. So you naturally get imposter syndrome. That's good. Imposter syndrome is good. You shouldn't let it stop you from trying things that you're scared of, because that's just a route to never getting what you want, right? I know that's difficult, and it's more difficult for some than others, and I have a lot of sympathy for it, but, you know, I just feel you have to push through it. But yeah, some people are just sleazy, and you got to watch out for them. I've unfortunately met more than I expected in my life.
Yeah, so you have this core contributor team of developers and marketing and so on. How are they going to be paid in the future? Are they going to be paid from when like, we just hope that T becomes successful to where the token is worth something, and then you cash the token out and pay them, or what's the game plan there in a year or two?
Yeah, well, like any startup, you know, we have to look to the future with optimism for how, like, the company is going to accumulate revenue. We're paid by the Swiss Association to build the protocol. My company is a core contributor to the T protocol, so we have an agreement in place that's going to start up at some point in the future. So the protocol needs to make, you know, normal money in some capacity, and so they will, yeah, be doing that by various means. You know, it's just how these blockchain type companies work. They have to figure out a route for themselves to be sustainable, as well as making sure the protocol itself is sustainable. Now, you know, we've carefully designed it so that the Swiss Association isn't making any money from the transactions going on to open source. You know, like GitHub sponsors takes 30% now. I think that's outrageous. T Protocol, 0% of all the rewards that flow through the system. So T Protocol has other means in which it's going to ensure it continues to accumulate token back to itself, so that it can, yeah, convert some of that into normal currency and pay the people that work there and pay us to build it. Some of those are in our white paper, but mostly these are plans for 2, 3, 4 years out, where we build other systems on the side that are like the DeFi. That's what people call it, decentralized finance products. Essentially, we've built out this open source ecosystem and assigned a kind of valuation to every project. So we think that there can be some interesting decentralized financial products built on top of that. Ones that help open source, and other ones that are just kind of experimenting with other kind of financial products that are on the side.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing what's gonna come from it, and I'm assuming all of it is also in spirit of T is going to be open source. I really look forward to see how that's going to be all built out, hopefully, if it comes so far.
Well, the beautiful thing about working with blockchain is it can't be closed source. Like, the smart contracts have to be open source. You can go and read any of the ones that are being done all over the chain. So yeah, you always have a handle on it. That's why, you know, people should get scammed less in the space, because you can always read the contract in advance. But just like, you know, anything, nobody really reads the source code in advance.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm sure we could have a whole separate talk about that if we wanted to, about scams and open source.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, lastly, I think I wanted to dive into like the actual T rank, which is the way you've kind of taken all this package data and quantified it into a singular number.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, you want to go through how, I mean, you've indexed all the package managers, but how the T rank works and how things are ranked and yeah, just everything about it.
Yeah, of course. So I really like how we do the ranking. As I was saying before, the way we've done it is very difficult to abuse. Now, when you're doing anything with blockchain, people try to find methods to get themselves higher amounts of token. They're incentivized to do so. It like the legality of it is a little up in the air, so that they're getting away with things that normal things like that in normal life would be considered fraud or um, other
Mhm.
other other crimes, But yeah, so they're incentivized to try and find these holes. So we had to make you have to build a tokenomics protocol, which is very difficult for people to find these kinds of holes in. So our system uses, yeah, the dependency data from the package managers to treat it as a kind of reputational stake. So if you make an open source project, obviously you're picking your dependencies. Almost no open source projects exist without any dependencies. glibc perhaps could be considered one, but still it needs headers from the kernel. The kernels, like even they are built with C. Like is there a single project that doesn't have any? But whenever you choose your dependencies, you're saying that the reputation of my project is dependent on the reputation of the projects that I depend on. So that kind of reputational stake, you can't fake it. You can't persuade Node to depend on your dependency if they don't want to, if they don't believe in it. So people can spin up spam packages and try and get them to have T rank, but they won't. It just basically cannot be done. Now, one of our challenges in the testnet is to break T rank. We're giving a significant amount of T test token points for breaking T rank, and we want you to basically create a fake package that has a T rank greater than 25. If you do that, we'll reward you for it, because we don't want that kind of issue to still exist once we go into mainnet. Anyway, so yeah,
Right,
the
and that's
dependency.
very understandable
Mhm. Yeah, well, this is
because
one of
again,
the.
you are dealing with financial instruments here. That, yeah,
Yeah,
that's again, as you said, that's why people are so incentivized to find holes in this because if they find a hole and exploit it before it's closed, that could mean the difference between no money and a lot of money.
yeah. Well, there's famous exploits in the blockchain space that you can look up, and people have come away with billions of dollars worth of token, right, in these protocols that afterwards are completely destroyed because you can't have one person have almost all of a currency, essentially. Like if one person had almost all the US dollars, then the currency would cease to have any value. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so
Yeah,
the person
exactly.
who comes
So,
away with that much typically doesn't get as much as the media says they do for it, but they still manage to sell it and convert it into other tokens pretty quickly that they can do stuff with. So yeah, we're totally incentivized to make sure that you can't break T rank, and yeah, this dependency data is like gold for that. All the open source developers are independently choosing these dependencies, and so if you get chosen more than a few times by projects that we already know are reputable, then you definitely have an open source project that is notable enough that we give you a T rank above 25. Because 25 is the cutoff. Below 25, we don't give you rewards. And it's a very obtainable amount of rank. But yeah, you do need a few other projects to take note of you for sure. But our goal is to make it so the people who are already building and maintaining the infrastructure that powers the internet and software are rewarded, not just anyone who fancies trying to start up an open source project tomorrow. If you're starting a new project, you probably have to work on it for a few months at least before someone will take note and use you. Now, we've built in a system for staking against open source projects, and this is part of the way that we're getting the rest of the crypto community interested in our token and the protocol. So they'll be able to stake against projects, they get rewards, the project gets rewards. So if you're a relatively new project, you can stick in your README, hey, stake against my project on T. Because unlike a donation where you donate $20, let's say, you lose that $20. With T Protocol, you can stake that $20 and then a year later remove it from the staking pool, and you'll have, I don't want to say it's more than $20. If I say like what I think you might get, then I'm sure that'll come back to haunt me in some manner. But it'll be more. And so both the project and you have gained from that participation. And in order to make that work, we have this complex tokenomics model that is creating a kind of economy based on the understood value that open source already has.
Yes, exactly. And so going back to this T rank, because I have done a lot of research into this T rank, I want to say, but obviously I don't know it as well as the people that designed it. So also, when I had the call a few weeks ago, when I got onboarded with some of your colleagues, we also talked a bit about the T rank, and from what I saw, it's an exponential graph if you look at all the T ranks, with kind of the languages sitting on top for self-explanatory reasons. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to go into that, of maybe the different percentiles, for when people look up their T rank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so above 25 means that you're known. 30 to 40 is like you're a popular project. 40 to 50 is like you're an extraordinarily popular project. Above 50 means that you're, of the caliber like Node and Python and Homebrew, which Homebrew isn't actually in T Protocol, but that's a completely different conversation. So, it's an exponential curve. There's a lot more open source projects that are, relatively small than there are ones that are enormous. And so we've calculated the rewards to spread in a nice fashion across that graph. But yeah, I think Node is the biggest one in the protocol with the T rank of 87, I believe.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, I really hope they're on board, right? But I don't expect big projects to onboard in the first year or maybe even two, right? Maybe they never will. They've already got established governance for their projects. A lot of them have already declared themselves charities, and they have funding models that are working well enough, probably not as well as they need for them. So, I don't see us gaining a lot of traction there, but initially, I really hope that one day they'll see that it makes sense for them, because in my mind, it really does make sense for them. They're just leaving, potential rewards on the table there. But we've had quite a few 50s and 60 projects on board over the last 2 weeks, and that's just great. We thought that we would be waiting a while to get projects up with that kind of T rank, but
That's incredible.
we're really pleased about it, and we're excited to see what kind of rewards they're going to get over time, especially once mainnet goes live for them. But anything above 16, you're pretty stellar is the answer. And we're gonna make a widget so you can stick this in your README. I'm sure everyone's going to be wanting to boast about their T rank.
I mean, there's two things I definitely want to boast about: is my own T rank, and that I was the first one on the beta net.
Yeah, you really did help pioneer this whole process for us, and I still want to get you an NFT for that.
I think they're looking into it, but yeah, I've already said I will print it out on my wall and hang it up in like a big format or like on a smart mirror or something like that.
Yeah, Toby. We'll get our designer to work on it. We're a little busy right now, as you
Yeah, I
might tell,
figured.
but I will not forget.
But yeah, that's definitely the two things I want to brag about with tea, because yeah, my tea rank, as far as I remember, is like 41 and a half or something like that. So pretty good.
It's an excellent T rank, it really is. I don't actually have any personal projects in T Protocol currently, bizarrely, because I spent years working on iPhone apps. So I have like 14 or 15 open source projects in CocoaPods, and we haven't added CocoaPods to the initial roster of package managers that are supported. I think they're worried that if they added it too soon, then I could just retire. They need me
Oh
for a couple
my.
of years.
But that's exactly what the T rank should avoid, because if it's apps, then the question becomes how many open source depends on your projects.
Oh yeah, well, what I mean is retire to work on open source. Obviously, they just don't want me to quit the protocol yet. You know, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Again, that's only being on the like, beta net.
But like on that point, you know, like what encourages open source developers to continue working if we're giving them these rewards that are, you know, potentially capable of meeting all their needs. Well, you know, over time, T rank will reduce if you're not maintaining your open source. That's just the nature of open source, right? Projects that get less maintenance, less updates, less keeping them current, keeping them maintained, eventually are replaced. That's it's one of the beautiful things about open source is there's always people trying for new alternative ways of doing the same task, replacing something because of something else. Like, you know, Homebrew was that, right? There was 2 package managers on Mac. I didn't think they were up to what I needed, so I built my own. And open source is never going to change. And if you're getting your rewards and you're just sitting on them, then eventually, you know, with a bit of time, someone will surpass you in T rank and start like siphoning off what you were getting. And that's the way it should work, right? I think
Yeah.
it's okay for there to be a little buffer time there. You should earn some credit for like the importance of what you've done. It remains important for a while. Like, I was talking to some open source dev the other day who I was also helping on board, and he had 2 projects with good T rank, and one was the newer version, the version 2 of it. It was a different project, but called 2. And the other was the old one, which was in the README, had deprecation warnings slapped all over it. And the T rank of the deprecated one was way higher. And I was like, well, you know, this just means that this is an important project that a lot of people still need and use. And he then said, maybe I need to undeprecate it. Like, we
That's
basically shown,
incredible.
yeah, we'd shown him basically that yeah, his even though he wanted people to move on to the newer version, sometimes you can't beat that momentum that is keeping these projects still going.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly that. Like you get rewarded by the open source community when you make something that a lot of people need and a lot of people have always wanted. Uh, but yeah, that's the good thing about if you don't want to maintain something, eventually someone is going to replace it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an area that GitHub should be improved for UI, honestly, is forks, right? Servicing significant forks. It's very difficult to get attention if you are maintaining a fork of something that is unmaintained, apart from luck, really. I wish GitHub would flag when you go to a repository. This one hasn't had any commits for 2 years, but this fork had commits yesterday, or something like that.
Yeah, but I'll definitely tell the people I know in GitHub to get on that.
I won't hold my breath.
I mean, me neither, but who knows?
Yeah,
I have
well,
worked with
it
them
would be
before,
it
so
would be
maybe
really.
they will actually listen for more than 2 seconds.
Yeah, well, I will cross my fingers and hope that your charming tongue can get that change done.
I mean, I can only hope so. Yeah, go. That's the imposter syndrome coming up in me. But yeah, I hope so.
Well, you know, GitHub used to be all about open source, and since the Microsoft acquisition, you can feel that it's not quite the same. So that kind of thing is to the benefit of open source. And yeah, I'm sure that the idea is very obvious to them. They've probably discussed it a million times over the years, but it's never crept in, and it's needed.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Now that you brought it to my attention, I can actually think of a project that um, could have used that specifically because it was archived or unmaintained.
Mm.
So, anything else you feel we haven't touched on that you're burning with getting out there?
No, it was a great conversation. I think we covered everything. All I'd end with, I guess, is you can onboard the incentivized testnet today. It's been out 2 weeks. It's going to run for another 6. Then we take 3 or 4 weeks off before we launch the mainnet. So, there's no hurry apart from the fact that the sooner you get involved, the better the benefits for you. It's at tea.xyz.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And if like people want to continue watching the progress with T and the people behind it, where should they? What's the easiest way to follow T?
Yeah, we got a variety of ways you can do that, depending on your preferences. We're on Twitter. We have a Discord. We have a discourse, which is the forum where the open source community will be invited to discuss how they feel the T protocol is working for them or not, and what improvements we need to make, and future planning. We really want this to be run by the open source community. The Swiss Association I've been talking about eventually will solely be governed by members of the open source community. Like, obviously, initially, that's not the case. It's currently governed by a complete expert on protocol design and tokenomics, Thomas Burrell. Genius he is.
Yeah, he is a really nice and also very smart person.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have him. But we've been lucky the whole way, right? Like, a lot of people really believe so passionately in what we're doing, and so they wanted to join the company. Didn't have to convince them too hard. But yeah, we got Discord, Twitter, and there's a mailing list as well. So whatever way works for your listeners.
And if you want to get involved, that's signing up on the testnet. And any other way that people can help out right now, or is it just following, waiting for the governance to be even more open?
Yeah, so the testnet is meant to be broken. We want everyone to go in and try to break it because we want to fix it so that when we go live, finally, there's nothing that's exploitable or damaged in any way. Other than that, the discourse forum is strictly for people who want to talk about how we're approaching what we're trying to do at T, and we would love to hear your thoughts for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that was all for today. So thank you so much for taking so much time out of your day. As we talked a little about before we started, that you are very busy putting out fires.
Yeah. Today was a release day for us, so there was a few things that we had to deal with this morning, but I think it's going okay now. But yeah, I had a really nice time talking, and thanks for having me on.